Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in, watching this presentation. And thank you to CUP for inviting me and for putting on this event. We actually did the event yesterday, and we had a little oopsie with the technology, and some of the slides were actually blurry. They were difficult to read. So we decided to just re-record the presentation, and this time with the slides in perfect condition. So what I said in the talk yesterday is that I'm actually really grateful that, especially at a time like this, that I'm a teacher and that I'm a member of a community like we have in ELT, where we're actually really all very keen to support each other. And there's so much shared knowledge, shared wisdom in this group that we're a part of. And I think that's an extremely positive thing to remind ourselves of, especially at a difficult time like this. And so what I was thinking about when I was preparing for this talk was that what I'd actually like to do is dip into that collective wisdom, our experiences over the last many decades, in fact, in teaching and supporting learning in a wide range of different contexts. Because of course, for each of us individually, moving to online teaching or blended teaching or flipped learning or whatever you may be new for us, but as a group, we have a lot of experience with, what works and what doesn't work, both from research as well as from classroom practice. And so what I decided to do was just to collect all of the wisdom and put it together into 10 rules for encouraging interaction in and beyond the classroom. They're not actually rules, they're more like, recommendations and suggestions, at least I would say things to reflect on and think about. So the question I asked myself was, given how difficult it is at a time like this to make sure that our learners are participating actively, that we are supporting them in the best possible way that we can, which is not only challenging for us, but also, let's not forget, for the learners themselves, getting used to speaking in front of a camera rather than just being one of the many faces in the classroom, that suddenly everybody can see you on the webcam up close, or, the different ways in which you communicate with your friends in the classroom or with the teacher. That's all very challenging. And so the first kind of rule or consideration has to be to ask ourselves, are we and how are we creating an environment of trust in the learning environment? And of course, that's always been important, whether you're teaching in a classroom or online, whether you're teaching 5-year-olds or 50-year-olds, of course, that's always been important. But right now, at a time when a lot of people, a lot of learners, and us too, are, dealing with anxiety and inconfidence, it's even more important. And we know from research in online learning that one of the predictors of success in, for example, MOOCs or other forms of online learning is whether people actually feel safe in that space. So slow and steady, take it easy. It's hard enough for us. It's probably even harder for our learners. And this also relates to this notion of what Pavlenko calls the affective turn in second language acquisition. So we've obviously for many decades understood the importance of cognition, the learning that happens in the brain. And in the early 2000s, we started to recognize that the social aspects of learning are actually at least as important. And so we saw what was called the social turn in the early 2000s. And more recently, we've started to better understand the tremendous impact, the role that emotions play in learning in general and language learning particularly. And so the affective term refers to this idea that all forms of affect, from anxiety to curiosity to boredom to confidence, all of these play a major predictive role in whether or not learners are going to be successful. And so as people like this quote here point out, our job as a teacher is to really work very hard on creating this environment of mutual trust. So the next time when you're planning your lessons for the next week or whatever, or designing the curriculum for the next term, I would say check one more time and ask yourself whether you feel confident that you've put enough opportunities into the program for learners and also your colleagues as teachers to maybe include activities, trust-building activities, icebreakers, all sorts of good tools and techniques that we as teachers use, because we need more of it now than ever before. And so rule number 3, focus on engagement, and interaction will follow. A lot of teachers, myself included, can sometimes get a little bit nervous when we feel or think that learners are not participating as much as we would like. And that applies in the classroom, in the face-to-face classroom, and maybe even more so online, because it's more difficult to see whether learners are actually present and participating, with full involvement. And we'll come back to that point a couple of times in the presentation. But right here, I want to just emphasize the importance, especially now, of relating to the things that our learners care about, the things that matter to them. So one particular area of interest of mine is actually in digital gaming. And I want to just briefly share with you a project that Sorada Watana, a former doctoral student of mine, and I did at Durakit Pandit University in Thailand, where we had a group of engineering students. And well, to be honest, they weren't very motivated in learning English. They weren't very interested at all, actually. And so we figured out that one of the things that they were excited about was playing games. And so we thought about how can we kind of engage these learners using the things that they actually enjoy outside the classroom. And so we told them, in this course, you can play computer games. And initially they said, well, we don't believe you. And I said, no, it's true. We're going to play games. But there's one rule. You can only play the game in English. All right? So we're going to use the online role-playing game Ragnarok, and you'll be meeting players from all around the world. And the language of communication in the game is English. And you're going to have to talk to them and, do some work. And also, in order to make sure that what you do in the game is linked with the curriculum, we're going to give you some instructions. We're going to give you a quest. In gaming language, a quest is like an adventure that you have to go on to meet other players and exchange information, find the treasure. You have to collaborate. You have to, it's very interactive. And so it really kind of required the students to use English in the game. And what this did was that it really, really helped the learners to become more confident and be less anxious about communicating in the target language. And in second language acquisition, we refer to that as willingness to communicate, which obviously just means, is the student in the moment ready to take the risk to actually express themselves and to go out and to use the language. And what we found with the digital games was that, their willingness to communicate was very low in the beginning, but at the end of the semester, it had increased significantly. And whether you use digital games or with maybe younger learners, you use music or TV or cartoons, doesn't really matter. The question is, what engages your learners? And then from that, you can think about interaction. Now, engagement, of course, we all know is important, but how do we recognize it? How do we know if students are really engaged, especially in an online environment where we can't easily observe people and walk around the classroom maybe? And here I think it's helpful to very briefly just remind you that actually there are different kinds of engagement. And in the literature, we recognize, firstly, behavioral engagement. And that's very simply, is somebody actually putting in the time that you expect them to? And are they participating actively? So for example, you might give a pair work activity or a group activity in class, and you can see that some learners are doing it and some learners are not. And that's just the behavioral level of engagement. That's important, but actually it's only one of four. The other is cognitive engagement. A learner may not be looking like they're very actively saying anything or doing anything, but the other question is, are they concentrating? Are they paying what is called sustained attention to what is going on? The third one is social engagement. Are my learners interacting with others? Are they feeling a sense of belonging and affiliation with other learners in the group? And that's a very, very significant factor as well. And then finally, here we have that word affect again. Are my learners motivated? Are they involved? Do they have a sense of purpose in this class? So you can see it's possible for learners to display more or less of one or the other of these. And if we're only paying attention to, say, behavioral engagement, we might miss that learners are engaged in other ways. Which brings me to point number 5, which is that learners express themselves, obviously, in very different ways. But we can only recognize that if we actually give them a voice. And now, in 2020, we're actually at a very interesting time because we have the technology available to us to enable us to let learners express themselves in many different ways. And there are so many apps that we can use to create new communication channels in the classroom, like Padlet and YoTeach and Go Soapbox, and there's literally hundreds of them. And they're all, good in some ways and not so good in other ways, so I don't want to really advertise one over the other. But what they do allow us to do, and what is pedagogically crucial, is they open up what is called in the literature a back channel. And a back channel is simply a technique for encouraging and monitoring student engagement and performance in and outside the classroom. So let me give you an example. During this talk, during the Cambridge Live experience, you have access to the forum and the Q&A. So you can share your opinion, you can give feedback, you can ask questions, and other people can see those questions and that feedback too. So you might have a question, and the presenter doesn't have to answer. Maybe somebody else has already answered. That's obviously very advantageous, because if you compare that with a traditional conference where everybody just has to be quiet and sit in a room, this is a lot more interactive. Now, from a learner's point of view, it's also very interesting because in a traditional classroom, if I don't understand what the teacher is saying, I may have to put up my hand and the lesson stops and the teacher says yes, and I might feel very anxious. I might even feel that I am stupid for being the only one not to understand what the teacher is saying. But if I can type my question, and even if I could do that anonymously, then nobody needs to know. And also, I can then see that, hey, hold on, other learners are having the same problem. It's not me, it's maybe the instruction. And that's very, very powerful because it gives learners a voice. And so using any of these or other apps, a back channel is very empowering for students. And on this link here, you can download an article that I've written on this topic with some examples of how you could implement that in the classroom. Now, another way of giving our learners a voice is through storytelling. And stories, of course, are one of the most important ways in which we learn. As babies, we grow up learning through and from stories. And even as adults, we create our own stories and we love sharing them. And so there's lots of very useful apps that allow learners to create their own stories using digital tools. And that's very powerful because especially with younger learners or learners who are beginners, not very proficient, they don't have to just use their own words. They can use other people's words. They can use music, images, cartoons, things they've created or drawn themselves to express who they are and what they like and what their lives are about. So it's really a wonderful way to give your learners a voice. And again, I've written on the topic of digital storytelling, and the same link, if you go there, you'll be able to download some articles on that. Now, what all of this really amounts to is giving learners a sense that they are being heard, that what they believe matters, and that we as teachers care about the individual, not just the learning and the curriculum, but about the learner, him or herself. And this idea of developing a sense of agency has been shown in the educational research to be the most important factor in academic success, not just in language education, but in all academic fields. If learners feel that they have a sense of responsibility, that their opinions, their beliefs, their ideas matter, that they have some control over the learning environment, that's very, very powerful. And similarly, if learners feel that all the decisions are made by someone else and there's nothing they can do to change the environment or the situation, that has very negative consequences. Now, you might ask, how do I do that? Where do you begin giving learners agency? Because you don't want to just go and say, all right, students, from today, you have agency, you are responsible for your own learning. Yeah, most learners wouldn't know where to begin, young or old. And so it's something that we as teachers work on to develop in our learners the ability to self-direct their learning in order to become true lifelong learners. And that is now even more important than ever before, because we are asking our learners to learn in very different environments than before, and each of them has to figure out how to do that. What you see here on the screen is my interpretation of the different stages in the self-directed learning process, which in my view learners need to acquire to be truly agentic, to really develop agency over their own learning. There are other approaches to this out there, and so I'm just sharing this one because it's one that I've worked on myself, and you can download it and read more about it at the bottom of the screen. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I want to give you a couple of examples of what I mean. So as a learner, one of the things you need to know how to do before you start learning by yourself is you need to, all the way on the other side there, know how to identify your learning needs. You need to know what you do and don't need to spend time on. And also you need to know how to translate that into meaningful goals. It's not enough just to spend a lot of time every day learning. You need to learn and know how to learn effectively, and setting good, practical, smart goals, specific, measurable, attainable, time-bound is crucial. And it's a skill that can be learned. It's a skill that we as teachers can demonstrate and practice together in class. And similarly, selecting the right resources or knowing what strategies to use there are examples as well of the skills that we need to be able to learn successfully. So my question to you, my challenge is, when you look at your curriculum, when and where do you actually give learners an opportunity to not just hear about, but also practice these things? And are you giving your students feedback on whether they are improving in these areas? And I think especially right now, any effort and time that you invest in this will be of great benefit to your students. Now, number 7 and 8 are to do with teaching interactional strategies and encouraging and rewarding collaboration. And these are particularly important in that as we encourage learners to learn how to express themselves more and to find their own voice and become more confident, as teachers, we need to know when they are actually improving and working on these skills, and also let the students know that we notice, that we can see that they're putting in an effort. And an example of, again, where the technology can be very helpful is in classrooms where you might be particularly interested in ensuring that your learners are working together meaningfully. And you might want to recognize when a student is particularly creative or working hard. And traditionally, we don't always, reward students for that. We give them a score on a test or a quiz or what have you. But when learners are actually trying to create a positive environment, take risks or what have you, then that's something to be celebrated and to be recognized by us as teachers. And so apps like Class Dojo, and there are many others, like Kahoot and Socrative, and there's a whole bunch of them, enable us to give points or comments or feedback on those aspects of learning. And so I encourage you to have a look at these to see if they might work in your classroom. Another example of an app like that is Cecil, which is a digital portfolio for young learners. And what's really neat about this and similar apps is that the learners, even though they're very young, are kind of responsible for their own learning, and they are given the sense of agency and ownership over their own learning from a very early age. So my daughter is 7, and she's got her own learning record in here. She keeps in notes of what she's done, what drawings she's made, what achievements she's had, and she knows that this is hers, not the teacher's, not the school, but she's responsible. And the other neat thing about it is that what kids do in school, whether online or offline, is then visible to me as a parent. So I might get a message when I'm at work, and it's a drawing that Eileena's made, our daughter has made, and I can see it, and I can comment on it, and give her feedback and say, well done, beautiful. And so the classroom is suddenly a lot more transparent and a lot more connected to what's happening outside. And so these kinds of apps can be very powerful in that sense. And what that allows us to do really is points 9 and 10. It enables us to make links with our learners, their lives, and kind of extend the classroom from a potentially very fixed, limited learning environment to one that's a lot more open. Now, and just as with the self-directed learning skills we looked at earlier, this idea of extending the classroom and expecting learners to learn not just inside the formal classroom, whether it's online or offline, but also to go out and become responsible for finding learning opportunities outside the classroom is something that, just like before, we've said, is not something that learners have naturally. It's a set of skills and attitudes that our learners need to develop over time, and that we as teachers can help our learners with by introducing those ideas gradually. And so I think of it as a learning ecology, eco meaning life, which consists of in-class learning, obviously, and beyond class learning. But it's the bit where they come together that I'm really interested in. And so if we want our learners to become more autonomous, then we're not going to just shove them out into the world and say, good luck, learn by yourself. And I recognize 4 kind of steps or stages that I recommend teachers go through in order to get learners ready. And it starts with simply encouraging learners. Think about, when you talk to the students, you say, think about what we've done today in class. Now, think about how you would use that outside. At this point, we're not doing anything. Just, think about it. Or look for some examples of what we've talked about. Can you see any of that maybe on TV, or can you hear of it in the music that you listen to? Okay? So you're planting the seed of, the fact that learning doesn't just take place in one setting. And then when learners are ready and they're kind of used to that idea a little bit more, we move on to preparing them. And now we're actually saying, well, we're going to be doing some work outside the classroom. Let's think about how that would work. So, if we wanted to, talk to a native speaker, how would you do that? How do you greet someone? How do you introduce yourself? What kinds of vocabulary might you like? And let's practice that. Now, in the classroom, with you there, that's safe. I can practice it without having to worry about making mistakes because there's no real native speaker, and you will give me feedback so I know if I'm doing it right or not. So it's very, comfortable. I don't have to be anxious. Now, at some stage, your learners will be ready to move on to actually trying that out outside the classroom. But we do that in a very supported way. We give them instructions, we give them activities to complete, we monitor how they are doing, and we are there to help them if they need it. So you can see it's very gentle. It's a process. And then we can see now we're right at that point where the in-class and out-of-class come together. At some stage, your learners will be confident enough to be able to carry out activities that involve learning beyond the classroom. And that doesn't mean that there's no longer a link with the classroom, because that's a great opportunity for you to ask the learners to bring back to the classroom what they did and experienced outside the classroom. Yeah? So you did that activity, you played that game, you spoke to those native speakers. How did that go? What worked? What didn't work? How could we improve? And then the classroom becomes much more connected to what happens in learners' lives. And what you're hoping for, what you're striving for, is that this separation that often, unfortunately, takes place between learning, on the one hand, formal education, and life, on the other hand, that actually the learning skills and the life skills and the learning experiences and the life experiences come together. Because we know from decades of research and teachers' experiences that when these two come together, our learners really develop a sense of agency, of belonging, of investment, and the learning outcomes are just much, much better. So with that, I'll stop this brief presentation. There's a lot that we covered, 10 rules in 30 minutes, too much really. So have a look at the digital handout on the link here. I've collected for you a number of articles on these topics, like digital gaming, storytelling, learning beyond the classroom, that you can download there. I'd also encourage you to get in touch with me in any of these ways, because I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what's working for you and what's not. I want to just finish by saying that I admire every single one of you, because you show up here at this conference to improve yourself in order to improve our learners' learning, especially in these strange and challenging times. And I absolutely respect that and thank you for your efforts. Thank you also for watching this presentation. As it says here, keep in touch, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.